say the job of a PM at Shopify is to build the right thing the right way at the right time. I think the book Lean Startup may have done more damage unintentionally to software than any other book. And as a result of it, we have a crap ton of bad software that should not be in production in the hands of people. I think being remote is an exceptionally bad idea for most companies. I encourage almost everyone to not do it. People overestimate the importance of what and massively underestimate the importance of how. I'm not saying all PMs need to write code, but all PMs need to understand how code is written. That's like an incredibly important thing.
Ready to go? Kaz, I am so excited for this. I heard so many good things. I spoke to Max Levchin before. I spoke to Harley. This is going to be a great one. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man.
Not at all, but listen, you've worked with some incredible people, and I wanted to start almost with like a quick fire on the people that you've worked with. If we start with Keith Rabois, I love Keith. What was your biggest takeaway from working with Keith?
I work a lot with both Keith and Max as partners because they both are in the Shopify ecosystem. And one of the things you realize about both of them, it's actually true about both of them, and I think it may come out of how they grew in tech, is that they are, and I say this with admiration, more aggressive than anyone you can imagine being. They're incredibly kind, but very aggressive in their execution and their ambition. Like, I have learned from both of them to be perpetually hungry. And it's very impressive watching them do that.
I'm just sorry. I'm just thinking of Keith thinking, yep, that's absolutely Keith. Yeah, we mentioned the show with Dalian before this, and Dalian's biggest takeaway was Keith's view of company building as like a Hollywood movie, where there's a director who sets the script, recruits the actors, and executes against that vision. That's one way to do it. And then the other way is test, iterate, talk to customers. How do you think about those two very opposing views of company building?
I think I have written a note internally to our product managers about this at Shopify. I think the book Lean Startup may have done more damage unintentionally to software than any other book. I think it's a well-written book, but it's been misunderstood by everyone who's read it. And as a result of it, we have a crap ton of bad software that should not be in production in the hands of people. And this is just a really good way to churn everyone off from these products. Look, people don't want to be tested upon. And this culture we've developed of ship things that you're not proud of, that you know are bad, just to like get some people to react to it, is just really bad. We would never do it this way anywhere else. Well, I am not saying everyone should spend 3 years building something before shipping. But the goal is to ship things that you are proud of being in the world.
Okay, can I just interject there?
Sure.
I get you and agree, but if we apply that to content, my first episodes were shit. I was terrible. You know, content, you grow, you learn, you develop.
Yeah, of course.
And what I tell people now is don't be afraid to do V1. Just get it out, because V2 will be better and V3 will be better.
So Harry, there's a difference here. When you look back at your work, you will always be ashamed of it. You'll always say, I was terrible back then. That's true of I'm not super happy with past versions of Shopify that we have shipped. But that's different. When we shipped it, they were complete products. Like you listen to your first podcast from start to finish, you can actually listen to it, enjoy it, and like as an audience member. But much of what software is being shipped today cannot be used or enjoyed because it is so incomplete. Like there's a difference here, right? And you had a vision, right? It's like, it is totally okay to ship a V1 of something which is constrained version of your final vision, right? That's totally okay. In fact, everyone should do that. But what a lot of people do is they have zero vision. They just ship something to see what happens next. And that's not how good things are built, right? Software is a much more similar to woodwork than people appreciate. Like, it's much more about building something complete that someone can enjoy. Imagine if someone shipped you a chair with 3 chairs just to test how it would work. Like, it just wouldn't, a chair with 3 legs just wouldn't work. And that's the difference between complete and incomplete. And I think this is what Keith is saying. Good software is like a good movie. It requires the whole thing to work.
Can I ask you a rather divisive question, which is, do you think visions are also dangerous? And the reason I say that is because when I actually started the show, my vision was actually to become an associate at a venture fund in London. Yeah. And, you know, in the time that I allocated for that, I actually raised $150 million on my own. But if I'd succumbed to my vision, I would have accepted that. And so visions can constrain you. Is vision always good?
No, I don't think so, Harry. Like, let's look at Shopify. Toby's original vision was to build a snowboard store, right? And he built one, and now Shopify exists. Like, it is very true that people learn and change their final goal. People learn and change their vision. But everything good ever created started with someone saying, hold on a second, the world is wrong about X, I will fix it. The initial thing of saying, I have to create a thing to fix a problem for me or for someone else requires you to know what you want at the end. Now, you may be wrong about that. You can change that, obviously. You know, like Microsoft's first product was a bootloader for BASIC. Microsoft is not a company that makes bootloaders anymore, right? That's a real thing. But Microsoft's first product wasn't, let me ship 2 lines of code and see what the third one looks like. There's a difference between beautiful things are created with a vision. It is okay for that vision to change over time.
You mentioned kind of Toby there and building the snowboard store as the first vision. You've worked with Toby now for several years. If we do the quickfire on your lesson from Toby, what's your biggest lesson from Toby?
2 things that Toby is exceptional in, and it's actually very impressive. The first is Toby has ingrained in the company a prioritization order that is very meaningful to Shopify. We say at Shopify we only have 3 priorities: build great products, make money, use the money to build more great products, and never reverse 1 and 2, right? Priority 1 is build products. Priority 2 is make money. Priority 3 is never reverse 1 and 2. And like, that is actually incredibly hard to hold as a publicly traded company of our size. That idea of like, hey, just never change those priorities and spend most of your time on the first one. This is a real thing. The second thing is, because of that prioritization stack, Shopify has a quality bar that is higher than most other software companies. So we hold things back that almost everyone else would have shipped. And this was actually a jarring thing when I first got to Shopify, but I realized how much Shopify overbuilt before it shipped.
Is that an effective use of resources?
Depends on your time frame. Depends on what time frame you're thinking of, right? If you're thinking about a year, hell no. It's a really bad idea if you're optimizing for 1 year to spend so much of your time overbuilding. If you're thinking the thing you're building will be around for 100 years, then for sure it was an effective use of your resources, right? It's just a matter of like what discount factor you apply to value of time, right?
I really couldn't get over it when you said about internal building of tools and how you said, like, hey, we built everything: compliance, HR, payroll. You don't have Linear or Jira. You have everything built internally. And I'm like, oh my! I was walking around the park and I was like, oh my God. Then you have to maintain it. You have to update it. You have to infuse AI into it to make sure. Like, I still do not get my head around this argument of how across the whole stack of software tools, it is better.
Like, Tesla spends a shocking amount of time building robots that build Tesla cars. They could buy those robots off the shelf. Like, they could actually go and buy off-the-shelf robots that everyone else buys to build those cars. But they spend a lot of time building those robots rather than buying off-the-shelf ones, right?
Why?
Because this is our tools shape us more than we realize. Like, we build our tools, then our tools build us. I think there's nothing wrong with using off-the-shelf software. In fact, we build off-the-shelf software for people to use. But if you're in the business of building software that people use for building things, which we are, then it's incredibly important to know where your opinions are coming from, right? There is no such a thing as opinion-free software. The fact that Google Sheets is built the way it is changes how you write, how you think, how you imagine the world. Like our tools shape us in ways that we don't appreciate. So it's a real thing. Like we have a tool called the GSD, which is our stands for Get Shit Done, which is our internal stakeholder management and prioritization and project management tool. Like I've shown it to people, and people are always amazed by how feature rich it is. Now, building it for us isn't that big a deal because this is what we do this all the time. We have an internal tool built for HR management. People look at it and they're like, whoa. Like most companies, let me give you an example. Headcount planning. A lot of companies they do headcount planning once a year. They go into some Excel sheet, but I'm pretty sure Excel has done more damage to the world than any other software. They go into Excel sheet, or they create some false certainty because Excel doesn't have a column for certainty level. So they model the world and they come up with a headcount plan. And the only thing I am sure of about that headcount plan is that it is wrong. Like I'm very sure the second they hit send, it is wrong. At Shopify, we've built software that imagines a company and runs continuously based on our prioritization stack, based on what we're working on, based on the APIs we have built ourselves into our data systems. So we don't have to have people building these like Excel sheets.
So it's like rippling, but for internal tooling, which is like the benefits that come from having the synchronicity between all the tools on one platform means that you can run simulations and models easily between your own tools.
Yeah, but I think rippling actually is probably the best software for startups that kind of like gets across the same thing. Like the fundamental problem of business software is that it is under-premised because it is under-dated. Like the data you need to run the business doesn't really exist. So like you have to do these like very weird like duct taping of different tools together to make your world work. Or in real world, what happens is a CSV export from here into an Excel sheet there to make decisions. So everyone's decisions, regardless of how big you are as a company, ends up being made in an Excel sheet. And like we're incredibly opinionated about this. We think this is a bad way to run a company. And I think everyone who comes to Shopify, their first instinct is, what the heck? You guys have built a what internally? And within 3 months, they're converted to why this is the way we do things.
Have you ever questioned the approach that you've taken? And if so, what moment led you to question it?
I had internal conversations where I said, this idea is dumb as a bag of hammers.
That would count as questioning.
Yeah, that was we were starting to build internal software. Shopify is a remote company. We're starting to build software to manage our culture remotely. I thought this was just the nuttiest thing to do. I'm like, this is just like total waste of code. Like, this is a bad idea. And like 6 months after we started, luckily Toby overruled me. 6 months after that, you could not rip this thing out of my hand. Like I have found it is incredibly valuable. So look, I think the most important thing is, and this is a really true thing about how we work at Shopify, we are together on the search for truth. Like our goal is to find like what truth is, and we are not that offended about like telling someone they're wrong. I actually once looked at my Slack history with Toby, and the most common phrase I had told him was "I disagree" over the course of the past like it was like a 30-day period. I'm generally a person like you can do these tests and figure out how disagreeable you are. I'm generally very disagreeable. I think I'm pleasant. I'm just disagreeable. Like there's a lot that happens inside the company where people genuinely, honestly disagree with each other. And our job is to find out the truth.
I totally agree. It's to find out the truth. And I too am disagreeable. And I was listening to you speak before, and you said about a learner's mindset being core to Shopify's kind of culture and one of your core values. And I think a value is something that you can either argue for or against. Mm-hmm. No one's going to argue against having a learner in the team, are they? I mean,
no,
everyone.
I think people are, Harry. No, I think they are. This is a real thing. In fact, every job posting that says you require 10 years of experience is arguing against a learner's mindset. Because the way the world works usually is one of two things, right? When you are young, your intelligence is fluid. You are learning things. When you get older in your career, you are now experienced. You're less learning things. You're now applying your experience. This is a real thing. It is actually perfectly reasonable to say, I do not want learners. I want experienced people who have done things to do it again. I think that's a real, and actually think most companies, I think the word learner is a good word, so people use it like more freely. But what we mean by learner is we want people who replace experience with the ability to learn a thing from scratch, which means that Shopify on average tends to do things differently than what experienced people would have done.
Are they incompatible though? So like when I hire for my investing team, I say everyone needs to have invested for 5 years. Yeah. But I still want someone with a learner's mind. I am forever learning. I don't think they're incompatible.
I think it's actually, there are businesses in which it is easier to make them not incompatible. Investing is actually one of those businesses. Poker is not one of those businesses. Because like there are like businesses where what your experience gives you is at bats that help you learn better. Like there are lots of businesses that are that.
Is every business like that? So product management, you release a product.
I think software could be like that, but software isn't mostly like that. Like if you look at like the very large traditional software companies, I'm not talking about like the fan companies, but the traditional software companies, like the enterprise software companies, they are mostly not about that. Like the thing they value mostly is this is a thing I actually used to do. I used to I no longer do it, but I used to literally go on the career page of these companies and search for COBOL, which is like an old programming language, and like see how many people with COBOL experience they were hiring, and there was always like dozens, each of them, and you're like, okay, cool, like. That's okay. It's totally okay to hire people with 10 years of experience in X. But you can't tell me someone who has 10 years of experience only coding in COBOL is a learner. Because it's not a thing that you like, because this is just like a decades old language at this point. No, like I think it's actually very profitable. And I'm not judging people's business models, but it's incredibly profitable to build a business based on experience rather than learning. In fact, most businesses in the world are based on experience, not learning. Now, I think if you're a growth company and a software company, that's your death. I think it is totally your death if you go that way. But let's be honest, most even growth companies just cosplay as learners. They have a whole bunch of things you're not allowed to say. Like a whole bunch of companies have like these religious things they believe that you're not allowed to question. And once that exists, well, you're not learning anymore because the thing you're supposed to learn about, you can't question. And like questioning things is how you learn about them.
Kaz, can I ask, what about the way or the type of people that Shopify hires would you like to change? So it could be the people itself, it could be the process.
Yeah.
But what would you like to change about the way you do it?
I mean, I've gone through a few of these here in my life at Shopify. In my first year, I tried to convince our recruiting team to put Shopify's career page behind an API. Like, i.e., it would not have a UX. Like, you could not go to shopify.com/careers. You just have to literally like use the API. My argument back then was, if you can't figure out how to do that, you probably shouldn't work in software. It's actually a thing I actually still do a great deal of.
Do you think that's an arrogant stance?
Sure, man, of course. Yeah, but
I like it personally, but I'm like, you know, in a labor market that's incredibly competitive, it's
I'm glad we didn't do it in hindsight. But to be clear, our goal is not to make it easier for people to work at Shopify. That's not the goal. The goal is to find people who are incredibly mission aligned and care about the thing we do and the way we do it, and make sure they have the career of their lives here. It's different. Like, this is a professional sports team. It's not PV soccer. My goal isn't for everyone to play. That's not the goal. Like, I don't want it to make it easy to register and show up and play. I want exceptionally good people who care about this thing to spend their time here. And that's not, it's different. Let me give you, I mean, we didn't do the API thing, but there's a real thing that is true. Most companies end up with content management systems, right? So their marketers end up with these templates. They type the words in, put the pictures in, they're like this WYSIWYG thing, and then creates a website for them. We don't have that at Shopify. At Shopify, if a marketer wants to create a new landing page, they have to go into GitHub. They have to know how to write some code. This is a real thing. And our marketers learn how to write some code. Like we expect people here to be able to do SQL queries. Like this is a real thing. Like many of our salespeople write SQL. This is not all of them don't, but many of them do. And this is a real thing. We actually care about this part of the job. Like we care about the people being here who are the type of people that want to learn new things. Now we'll gladly teach you SQL. We'll gladly teach you how to code, but you need to be able to want to do these things.
I do want to touch on one final important figure, and that is Zuck. You obviously spend time at Facebook or Meta now. What was your biggest takeaway from Zuck, Kaz?
But Meta and Mark are both underappreciated, like incredibly underappreciated. First of all, I think Mark's ability to understand risk adequately is just probably unparalleled in business history. I just think the guy's ability to understand what it means to take risks is just incredible. And because of that, Meta has a much higher risk tolerance than most companies.
What's the best risk he's taken and what's the worst?
I mean, newsfeed. Just think about it's actually not there's no such thing as when you take risks, sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't, and you don't judge the outcome, you judge the process by which you take risks, because the outcome doesn't really matter. If the process is good, on average, you'll be right, or not on average, risk adjusted, you'll be right. But think about newsfeed, which is the thing that people think of as Facebook. It did not exist when Facebook launched. Paul Buchai built it as friend feed, and they just bought it and they rebuilt the entire thing. The like button didn't exist. These are substantial changes in a young product that people would never think of doing today. Most founders cannot imagine saying, I'm going to change my product by this much. And this is very early on. Ignore everything else that they've done that has just been amazing. Ignore the incredible bet they're taking on AR, VR, which I think people mocked and are starting to realize they were wrong about mocking.
Why are they wrong about mocking it?
I mean, I think if you have used the new Ray-Ban glasses, you have seen what the future will look like. It is very clearly how it's going. It's just very clear that this is I think Ray-Ban glasses are just not quite the iPhone moment, but they're almost the iPhone moment. I think when the next Quest comes out, I have no insider information on when it will come out, but some of it has leaked. People's minds are gonna it's just gonna be the promise of AR will be real, and it's just these people have just it is. And imagine the amount of backbone it took to keep investing in this thing and build a new paradigm of computing when everyone was shitting on it.
What do you think was the worst bet that he took?
The worst decision Meta probably made was not being more publicly celebratory of Mark personally and Meta generally. I think Meta allowed, because the company was so focused on execution internally, it didn't spend that much time worrying about its reputation externally, and essentially allowed a lie to spread about it that has caused it significant pain. I don't think that will matter in the long run, to be honest, but in the short run, it's clearly been painful, right? This has been a real part of what's happening in much of the world regulatorily is just clearly very misguided. And it's misguided because Meta didn't spend time educating people. And there's another thing about Meta that is important to appreciate. More founders have come out of Meta than any other tech company. This is there was a point at which you actually looked it up. It's like PayPal-esque, but at much bigger scale. There was a point at which I compared this a few years ago of the number of $100 million companies that have started by ex-Facebook employees versus ex-employees of other major tech companies. All of them combined was less than Meta.
Wow.
And it was, this is a few years ago now. But yeah, it was a real, Meta's impact on the world is unappreciated in ways that is hard to quantify.
You mentioned there the potential comms challenge that they let slip and let permeate. One thing I thought was fascinating that you said the best PMs have inherent within them is you have to blame yourself for everything. Why do you have to blame yourself for everything, Kaz? And is there ever a time when it's not applicable?
Product management is not a job that has traditionally existed in the world, right? It's not like you can't go and find a product manager's guild of the 1700s. That's not a thing. It's what we call product management is a relatively new thing. Like it was basically invented by kind of like Netscape, kind of Google, kind of Meta. Like this is real. That's how old. Like this is like early 2000s-ish type thing. Before then, by the way, if you actually read like the story of Compaq or coming up or Dell coming up, the people who did most of the job PMs do today were marketers. The VP of marketing would have been like kind of in charge of the roadmap. And there was a real change in essentially, like, I think Netscape was the OG here, but people give credit to Google and Meta too. What essentially the job is to understand and represent the user and the user's best outcome, not best wishes, best outcome for the user, given the market you're in. Like that's the job, right? And if the user is not better off, only one person could have made the mistake. If the user is not better off, it's because we say the job of PM at Shopify is to build the right thing the right way at the right time. Most companies don't actually care about the right way part or the right time part. They care about the right thing part, but we care about all three.
If you were to trade off on one of them, what would you trade off?
The right thing, for sure, the right thing. Because people overestimate the importance of what and massively underestimate the importance of how. Like people just massively underestimate the importance of how in ways that are just like shocking still. Like if you think of like most people in most software companies spend their time arguing what should we build, whereas they really should be arguing where should we build it? Like where in the stack should this thing be built rather than what we should build? Because that's like, if you get that decision right, you actually can end up building a lot more. This is why, by the way, more PMs need to be more technical. I'm not saying all PMs need to write code, but all PMs need to understand how code is written. And like that's like an incredibly important thing in like the stack of priorities.
It's funny you said there about kind of most companies spend a lot of time talking about what. I had Gustav, the CPO of Spotify, on the show, and he said, talk is cheap, so we should do a lot more of it. And I still disagree. I believe in dictatorial regimes. I believe in someone having a vision and then executing against it. I think most of the debates, brainstorming, fucking retreats that we do today are not right, actually, and ineffective. Do you agree with me, or do you actually agree that talk is cheap and we should do more of it, and communication amongst teams is the best way to build?
So I actually disagree. Talk is cheap, because most people actually like when they talk about talk is cheap, what they mean is I can say things without that much consequence to me. What they miss is people have to listen to you. So their time spent listening to you is very not cheap. In fact, we have this thing in Shopify where we calculate the cost of every meeting and put it in the meeting invite. I can tell you talk is very, very not cheap. It's incredibly expensive.
Were you worried when you implemented that you would then disincentivize meetings that could create moments of magic? Because I agree with you totally, but it almost reminds me of calories on menu, which is like, I get you. If you continuously show me there's 1,200 calories in the apple pie, I'm not going to eat it. But that apple pie might have been fucking sensational, and I just missed the moment to be happy.
I don't think so, man. I think it's like, obviously everything has risks. It's plausible we did that, but the way you do things matters more than the outcome. But I actually think the world is tilting more in our direction, thankfully, from when we did this to now. So Shopify, like the thing we want to do is for more things in Shopify to be communicated via words and code written down rather than in live meetings, right? That's what we want. We want to tilt the word more that way.
Are you sure that the world is going back going to your way of thinking?
Well, I'm not sure if everyone's doing it, but I'm very sure that the outcome will be more favorable to us. Like if you think about how LLMs work, you need something to train the machine on. And the fact that we had this discussion in paper, we wrote our thoughts down and they made an outcome, is a very good thing for training the machine.
Unbelievable. I totally agree with you. The lost data and, the future of AI is how you work, show you're working at school, and we don't have any of that in data within companies. I'm just speaking to, 10 CEOs a week of billion-dollar plus public companies. And they're all saying, dude, it's so much better in person. It's so much better. We're all back. I'm trying to.
I think being remote is an exceptionally bad idea for most companies. It is really, I encourage almost everyone to not do it. The reason it works for Shopify is because we have spent so much time and so much effort building systems and tools and software to make this work. Like it is, if you go YOLO remote without all the tools we have built, all the teams we have focused on this thing, you will 100% for sure fail. For most companies, they should not do it. It's a bad idea. But that's, by the way, that's structurally true of Shopify. Like if you go back and read the early memos on like investors in Shopify, they were all like, no one should do this. Like, it's a really bad idea. Like serving e-commerce, which everyone thought was a small TAM opportunity, for small businesses, which everyone thought was, again, going to decline, insanely high churn. Like it's a definition when you read 0 to 1, Pierre Thiel's book. They're like, don't open up a restaurant. It's very churny. Shopify dedicated its core mission to serving people who were the most churny. They're like 1 million times more churny than restaurant entrepreneurs. It's like Shopify is very good at this thing where like it would be a really bad idea for everyone else, but it's an exceptionally good idea for Shopify.
What makes that though? The process with which you approach it?
Yeah, I honestly think this goes back to like Shopify has 2 core values that are different than most companies. And I know this is like but I think they're actually also embodiment of Toby, our founder, who like is very much like this. The first is like thrive on change. Now, thrive on change sounds good, but most companies actually don't want to thrive on change. Most companies are built such that they do incredibly well in times where there are no change, right? That's what most companies are. Like if there's change, most companies are not built to handle it. Shopify is built such that it does better when there's change. When there's dramatic change, Shopify just does better. That's how companies built. So we're like very thrive on changey. The second is this is a learners thing we talked about, whereas like Shopify is built such that normal things take us longer at Shopify than it would take most companies. Let me give you like an example. This is no longer true, but it was true when I got to Shopify. If you want to hire a person at a regular company, you go to HR, you give them like, hey, I have an empty head count. Please go hire this person for me. And as a process, they run it through, that works. When I got to Shopify, there was no such process. So hiring someone was just a very weird, you had to discover like it from the first time. How do we hire people? That's a real, like, it took us longer to hire people than most companies, which means our headcount grew far more slowly than most companies. That's a real downside, right? If you're optimizing for speed in something.
It reminds me actually of Founders Fund's investment decision-making process, where they actually say you want to increase the friction to an investment decision being made because it increases the requirements on the decision maker's side to get it done. If you don't have an HR team who can just throw it over the fence, like, oh shit, I've got to do it. I've got to source candidates. That's the same thing.
That works for us. This works for us, really. But for most companies, that amount of ownership would be really hard for people to understand, right?
What change did Shopify find hardest? And what did you learn from that? You said like Shopify actually thrives in change. What change did you not thrive from? And what did you learn from that?
I mean, 2 things. Going remote was incredibly difficult for Shopify. It took us a very long time to get right. I can honestly tell you for the first 6 to 12 months, it just straight up wasn't working. Like,
how so? Just comms breaking down?
Shopify went from being incredibly in person. Shopify did not even have co-located teams. All teams had to be in the same pod. It's like we went from that to fully remote, like that. And none of the cultural things that had made Shopify worked translated. So that change was very difficult. It was just incredibly painful. I mean, there's been other ones that have been, we made a change where Shopify pays people differently than most companies.
Yeah.
Like most companies you go to say, hey, here's your salary, here's your equity, here's your bonus structure, whatever. At Shopify, we say, here's a pile of money. Here's a software you can use to allocate that pile to salary, equity, like a bunch of other things. That change was a very weird change. Like, let me give you an example. Like, that change required Shopify to change its equity process because, like, literally what we wanted to do was illegal in most of Europe. Like, the ability to give people the ability to take options or RSUs or like pick between them was just like very. So it took us many. It actually ended up with Toby personally writing a crap ton of code to actually make this thing work because it was very painful. Now that we are through it, during the time it was just very painful because it was just people were reasonably worried that like, what the hell is happening here? But now that we're through it, I don't think any company does this as well as we do. But it was very painful.
What are those discussions you have when it's not working? Did you talk about going back to fully in person? Because there's got to be a moment 6 to 9 months in where you're going, shit, did we make the wrong decision?
I mean, we burnt the bridges relatively well behind us because we knew it would be painful. So I think if we knew how painful it would be, I don't know if we would have done it. But once we committed to it, we burnt the bridges pretty well behind us. Like, we encouraged people to move. We like gave up our leases in a bunch of places, took the write-downs, gave up the furniture. Like, we made it like a lot of companies that went remote during COVID, like kept their offices pristine, did not give up the leases, managed like did the whole thing so that you had the optionality to go back. We hired people in places that were nowhere near our offices on purpose. So we made it very difficult for ourselves to go back.
Do you think you make it difficult for yourselves with public markets because of your contrarian stance on remote, on, you know, how you thrive in change, on the way you hire? It's not an easy story for analysts to get their heads around.
I think Shopify is insanely difficult to model for analysts.
Why?
First of all, our business is not a common one, right? This is like not we don't run a CPG. We don't run a traditional SaaS business. We don't run our business is hard to model. Our growth is hard to understand. It's very hard to understand where Shopify's growth comes from and how it shows up for analysts outside, whereas it's not that hard for me.
I'm sorry to be naive, but the show thrives on basic questions. Why is it hard to understand your growth, and how do you simply explain your growth to your children or a 10-year-old or someone who does not?
Well, it's not hard to understand where our growth comes from. Our growth comes from people starting businesses and those businesses succeeding and making lots of money, and we share in that upside. That's like basically where Shopify's growth comes from. So it's not hard to say those words, but it's very hard to model those words. It's very hard for analysts to say, hey, this cohort of Shopify merchants will have next Allbirds. In the same way, it's actually difficult for analysts to model VCs, because what Shopify is essentially is like we invest in cohorts of startups. Tens of thousands of merchants try to start a business on Shopify. Like I won't say how frequently because that's publicly available, but like very frequently. And they grow up, and some of them become very big, and many of them don't. Many of them die. Some of them become very good lifestyle businesses, which is what people want, or side hustles.
And you still make money from them, and it's kind of the portfall approach. In the venture game, there you're kind of 1s and 2x's. I totally get you there. But what you've done is you've realized, hang on a minute, Allbirds is kind of great, but Supreme is probably better. And actually, the older, bigger commerce enterprises are great. And there's been a very clear shift in Shopify's strategy to enterprise into the core existing brands.
Yeah. I mean,
am I wrong with that?
I think we did it in a very different way than most people think. So I was here at Shopify. I was a person who used to tell enterprises away. Like, one of the top 10 retailers in the world asked us to use Shopify a few years ago. And I said, no, you may not. We don't sell PowerPoint ware at Shopify. Like, we don't show up with PowerPoint presentations that say like, look at all the stuff we have, and then none of it works. Like, we have a product rule called no party tricks, i.e. we don't show you a thing in its that can work only in very specific instances. Like if we show you a thing, it can just generally work. So we don't do the party trick thing of look at me doing this one thing, but as soon as you try to do it again, it just fails. So what we take great pride in selling the type of software we do. So, but over the last couple of years, it's not like we went up market at Shopify. We just kind of like stopped saying no to all the enterprises that wanted to use Shopify.
Why?
Well, because the software is now very ready. The product is now very ready for them. And we don't, by the way, we don't treat, like Shopify is not a enterprise software company. We build software that enterprises use. But we do not build, and I think most enterprises that use Shopify appreciate this. We don't build bespoke software. There's no if enterprise line anywhere in Shopify's code base.
But when you have enterprise clients, and again, I'm naive here, so correct me, but you need SOC 2, you need levels of compliance, you need permissioning, you need a ton of different product features, which are a pain in the ass and normal smaller businesses wouldn't have. You need customer service, you need customer success at different levels. An enterprise, it's a different company, no?
Luckily, because of the way Shopify has worked, is we have, billion-dollar public companies that start on Shopify on day one, right? Like these are massive, massive companies that just start on Shopify. Fashion Nova is a multi-billion-dollar retailer. Figs is a public. Like these are like very large companies that start on Shopify. So we've been able to model the business as they've grown up. So we needed SOC 2 for Figs to go public. Like this is like, we didn't need it for what most people end up doing is doing this the wrong way, right? They go to SOC 2 saying, what can I build? And then they build the thing SOC 2 says you shall build, which is why all enterprise software ends up being shit, right? Whereas what we had to do is we had to do a first principle approach. We have this piece of software. We have merchants that need, Sarbanes-Oxley compliant because they're going public. How do we, from a first principle, make that work for them? That means a different software experience. Like it just genuinely, honestly, and I'm like, look, there are many, 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 many public companies that use Shopify, like many of them, like very large part of commerce in the world, right? But I'm telling you, to them, it just looks different than like an ERP would. It just looks like good software. And I think that's not that different. Like, look, enterprises use Windows, small business merchants use Windows. Like how you build the operating system matters.
I agree. How you build the operating system matters, which makes me wonder, kind of going back to our core conversation of like the internal tools you build, why do you still use Stripe?
Because they're exceptionally good at what they do.
But it's the one tool. But it's the one tool that you will take from someone else.
No,
and it's probably one of the core, the movement of money.
No. Shopify, this is actually real. So the reason we built internal tooling is because no one has built internal tooling this good and this opinionated the way Shopify wants it to be. Shopify is opinionated about how companies should be built. There's no one else that shares those opinions that can build external toolings for us.
I get you, but by outsourcing that decision making on the future, they could change that perspective.
If Stripe and Shopify ever get to a point where like we don't think about the world the same way, then we'll have a conversation. But there's a real, level set. Shopify has over 700 payment providers integrated into it, right? So we have like lots of them. Stripe is just by far our biggest partner. We have more payment integration on Shopify than any other software platform in the world. Stripe is just our biggest partner. And this Stripe-Shopify relationship is likely the most value-creating relationship in the history of software. It would have been Intel-Microsoft before Intel and Microsoft had divorce is too hard a word, but had like the thing they did.
Separation.
Yeah. But right now it's Stripe and Shopify. The amount of like these companies were both started when they were both worth single-digit millions of dollars. So they started working together, and now they're worth more than that. Like that combined value is very, very high. And it's because of each other, right? We like them, they like us. We're very happy to be their partners. But we have similar like relationships with Affirm, right? Shop Pay Installments is powered by Affirm. We have our billing product is powered by a company called Melio. Our a managed markets product is managed by a company called Globally. It is not that we can't partner. We partner exceptionally well. It's that we're incredibly opinionated about what good software looks like, and therefore can only partner best with people who also have similar opinions.
I get you. When you hear like, building for 100 years, there is an unknown future from an external party that they could change their perspectives or opinions on the world. That is very likely.
Sure,
And then
maybe, dude. But like, hear me out, Harry. Like, this is like the alternative here. The alternative is what most software companies grow up in a very zero-sum world. Like, they are incredibly jealous of their adjacencies. Like, every software, that's not going to be more fair. Most software executives will spend their time thinking, which adjacencies can I go to? Like, which of my, like, that's a lot of what software is, right? And that means that most software companies pick fights they don't need to pick. Like, they're incredibly complementary. And I think Shopify is Stripe, Shopify and Affirm, Shopify and Meta, Shopify and Google, Shopify and Apple. Like, these are incredibly powerful partnerships. We have very deep partnerships with many tech companies. And it's not because we're like, Switzerland. It's because we are very incredibly aware of what our job is and what other people's job is. So we don't really talking to banks. We don't think is our job. We think it's Stripe's job. We have 700 of these, but
what fight do you think you did need to take?
It's just not the company's psyche that much. We're very, very glad that Shopify as the Shopify type of software won over the Yahoo stores type of software, right? Like, this idea that thanks to Shopify and companies like Shopify, commerce on the internet is slightly more weird than it would be if Yahoo had won. Yahoo stores had won, which is the Paul Graham product. I like Paul Graham a lot, but I'm very glad that his software at Yahoo did not win. But I'm not sure that that was more of a conflict of visions than it was a conflict of companies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What was the most serious disagreement you and Toby had?
Probably going over remote.
He wanted to, you didn't?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was 100% right. He was 100% right.
When was Toby wrong? You've said before about, Toby's very...
I don't do that. That's not how this is a very real thing. Because I think I am wrong so goddamn often, I don't actually attach that much value to my opinion. Attach a great deal of value to having an opinion, but I don't attach that much value to my opinion. So what ends up happening is I don't really keep track of whose opinion was right at the end of the day. I know it's very odd. I just don't.
What is the most underappreciated element of Shopify's product roadmap vision today?
I think people underappreciate how broad the product is. The surface area of the product is very, very, very big. And people underappreciate how massive it is. In that way, Shopify is much more similar to an operating system than an application. People underappreciate how Shopify is not really a point solution. And this is part of the reason why analysts have a hard time modeling it. Because it's just not, it's hard to model that. Because you want to build a bottom-up model of something, it's really hard to do it for a thing that's this. The use cases of Shopify are incredibly diverse. And I'm this is perfectly good for us. We are tool makers, we are not application builders.
I always remember Toby talking about companies being worse run than World of Warcraft clans and, the importance of tool makers in the world. And I always remember that. I do want to ask, on a more personal side, I've heard you say before you have a hard time not saying things you think are true. Mm-hmm. What do you think is true that you're having a hard time saying? So, for example, I think that remote is terrible for 99% of people and for mental health. I think that Kamala Harris is dangerous for the US future. I don't think Trump with JD Vance is much better, but I think he's better. I'm a bit nervous about saying both of those things.
I'm actually not that nervous about saying anything, I believe, because I'm perfectly happy saying Kaz was wrong. I'm perfectly happy saying I was wrong. I have no problem saying, I do a post very frequently internally to a whole company saying Kaz's biggest mistakes over the last few months.
What was the biggest mistake you posted internally that you did?
The biggest mistakes I have made in my career have all been of the same shape, unfortunately. And it's like just very, I'll tell you the shape. And it's a lesson I will perpetually learn. I need to relearn every single time. I have limited the information flow, made it go through the org chart. Like every single time that has happened, like all my biggest mistakes are of that shape. The information that someone needed to have didn't get to them because the org chart, like it went up the org chart rather than like dynamically. This is like there's I guess like a biggest mistake. Now, one of these mistakes is very, very large. I won't tell you the specific of it, but like that shape of mistake is very...
So just so I understand, what do you mean? Like the information flow didn't go the right way? And
Let me give you an example. Like at most companies, the way it works is I have an idea. I write a note. I tell my boss about it. My boss likes it or doesn't like it and tells his boss about it. And up the chain, the information goes till someone says yes, and it comes back down and I do it. That tree. That's a very common pattern. It's true at every company. It's true even at Shopify sometimes. But that's incredibly terrible. Like one of the things I tell my team is to share information publicly, and it's perfectly okay for your boss to find out about something at the same time as the whole company. That's perfectly okay. But my biggest mistakes have essentially been when an information has gotten to me without being publicly shared, such that opposing views haven't gotten their hands on it.
Do you really think it is okay for bosses to find out at the same time as the whole company? Sometimes
for most information, yeah, of course.
Sometimes morale needs to be managed. Sometimes you need to control messaging. Sometimes actually it could piss off sales to hear that and see. I think actually you need a lot more control on messaging.
No, this is so. Sometimes yes, but those times almost always involve a lawyer. So like, sure, sometimes information needs to be managed. But no, the default should be that all information should be shared publicly such that people in the company never think, oh, these people are just bullshitting me when things are going well. People need to see the ups and downs, need to see the decision-making, need to build in the open such that they can benefit from information from everyone. Like this is a real, but the opposite is, this is one of the benefits of values is that you only have a value if the opposite of it can also be true. Like Apple is a company that's very on the opposite side of the spectrum from Shopify on information flow. And Apple is an exceptionally good company, right? Most people at Apple don't know what other people at Apple are working on.
Sure. I totally agree. And so you agree with me when you say you can't have like integrity as a value because no one would want a low integrity.
Sure. Exactly. 100%. Yeah, it's dumb. Like values need to be things that a reasonable person can take both the other side of. So the way it works for us and for me, that's why I work here, is information openly shared from many other sources, people publicly disagreeing or publicly agreeing, allowing sunshine to fix things is the best thing. And people being okay saying, hey, I was wrong. Hey, I was right. Hey, like that you want to build that collegiality. This is a real thing. I'm not an athlete, but if you look at great sports, like watch soccer or watch basketball, you'll see the players are literally always talking to each other. They're always giving each other feedback. You should be here. You weren't there. Like that's always happening. And that can just not happen if they're all secretive about where they intend to be on the court, right? Like this is a very similar thing to companies. And this is like this is what I'm saying, where you build it matters more than what you build. If everyone in the companies knows more or less what everyone else is building, you will never have two versions of one thing. You will always say, cool, let's you and I work together and build this difference so it fits both of us.
Kaz, speaking about alignment, you write a lot about marriage, which is a different type of alignment. Again, we're addressing the element of disagreement.
Yeah.
But when we look at, Google, when we look at Amazon, when we look at Microsoft, when we look at Elon Musk and X and Tesla, and when we then extrapolate that out across everyone worth over $100 billion, there's a terrible stat that basically, I think it's like 84% are divorced. you espouse the value of marriage. The world seems to point the opposite, actually.
Generally speaking, it's really terrible to model your life after people who are worth over $100 billion because they're rare, right? They're just not like their circumstances will almost never be your circumstances. I'm not saying you shouldn't desire to be a billionaire if you want to be.
Do you think those divorce rates would be lower in the billionaire range?
I don't think that's also a good measure. I think what matters is this. First of all, divorce rates are lower than people think they are because what divorce rates count is a number of divorces. And it is just true that people who get divorced frequently get divorced more than once. So there's a distribution problem, right? Most first-time marriages do not end in divorce. Like most first-time marriages do not end in divorce. Although a significant number of second-time marriages end up in divorce.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a real thing. Second, the data behind this is undeniable. Like I wrote a book about this, but you don't have to read my book. You can read the academic research on this. The data behind this is undeniable. For men, specifically for men, graduating from high school, getting some job experience, and getting married in that order as soon as possible is more indicative of success, including health, wealth, and happiness, than any other thing. Like we can't find something that is more indicative of future happiness. The odds of bankruptcies go down. The odds of health events goes down. Cancer survival rates for married men is significantly higher than single men. Like there's a real thing about like bankruptcy rates are lower for married men than single men. There's a real thing here that is not. Now there is.
Would you argue that marriage is good for downside protection, but a cap for upside maximization?
No, I wouldn't. Look, I think at any given point in your life, you have to think about like.
When did you get married, Kaz? What age?
I got married relatively late. I got married when I was. I got engaged when I was 29. Married when I was, I think, 30. So like later than like I think most people in the US would. I'm not American, but most people in North America would have gotten married earlier. Look, bad marriages are incredibly bad, but there are things you can do early in life, and there are things you can do to prepare yourself for a good marriage. And those things are worth doing regardless of getting married or not. And that once you do those things, a good marriage is incredibly useful on every metric we can measure.
Why is it then everyone says, oh God, it's so good when my wife's away or my husband's away because I have time to work and I can focus on myself and I can really concentrate. And God, they're back. And I mean, dude, we're both humans. It takes time being in a relationship.
Sure, but it takes time to work out. Doesn't mean working out is bad for you. Like it takes time to like work. I mean, work is bad for you. There's a real thing here that is, first of all, there's two things. One, there are lots of things people believe that turn out to be not true. In fact, most human progress has happened because the thing that lots of people believe is true turns out to be not true. So that lots of people believe it is not like an appeal to majority opinion is not a good sign that anything is true or not. Second, I think this is a place where popular culture has misled us greatly. Where, look, I admit it is just like it is funny to talk about, oh, my wife is gone, I can finally have fun. It's just funny. But I'm telling you, the most fun I have in my days is with my wife.
How long have you been married?
Over 10 years now. Just over 10 years.
Is she on the other side of your computer?
No, she is not. She's get a kid somewhere. This is a part that's like uncomfortable to talk about publicly, but married men have more sex than single men do. Married men are richer than single men are. Married men, like it is very like there's all the things that you think I should optimize for by being single. Data proves you are wrong.
I'm not surprised about the sex. I am surprised about the richer.
Yeah, it's not even close. It's not even close. It's not like a 1 standard deviation different. It may be like a 2 standard deviation different. Like, the worst thing you can do for yourself economically is be divorced, obviously. Like, being divorced is very bad economically. But being single, the bad, divorced, single, married.
What do you know about marriage now that you wish you'd known when you got married?
When you are married, there are three parties you need to care about, not two. It's you, your wife, and the marriage. Like there's three entities that you need to care about, and all of them need to be independently cared about. You take care of yourself, you take care of your wife, and you take care of your marriage. And those are three different things. And if you think about that, what ends up happening is that every once in a while, you realize that you're taking care of yourself and your wife, but not the marriage. And that's incredibly important. Like my wife and I, like, look, we have 4 kids. We have 4 young kids. We have date nights almost every week because we value taking care of the marriage.
Should we do a quick fire round?
Sure, man.
Okay, let's do it. So first one, what is the best and the worst incumbent to hire leaders from? The reason I say this, I was walking around the park with a public company CEO and he said, never hire leaders from Google. They're terrible to ingest into your company. Who are the best and who are the worst to hire from?
I have found that hiring people from Meta generally has worked out very well for most people because just as a training program, it's just exceptionally good. I don't know if there is one generic course, but industry switching is very difficult. Like hiring marketers who are not from software into software generally doesn't work out. Hiring finance people who are not in software into software generally doesn't work out. So industry switching is very difficult.
Okay, what have you changed your mind on in the last 12 months?
I changed my mind about the gold standard. Like I used to mock it openly, and I now think I was wrong. So this is one of the things my wife was right about and I was wrong about.
What character trait do you like in yourself, but you wouldn't want your kids to have it?
I'm a hacker. I'm a hacker's hacker. Like I grew up hacking things. And my 5-year-old son the other day found a way to get his password for his iPad, for his time on his iPad. And at first, I'm so proud of him for hacking the system. But like about 30 seconds later, I'm like, oh no, my son has unlimited access to an iPad. So that has been hard.
What one piece of advice would you give to a product leader starting a new role today?
Optimize for at-bats. Optimize your first few years in your career for shipping as many things as possible rather than career progression.
Will Kamala win?
I'm not American, so I don't spend that much of my time caring, to be honest.
Huh. Do you not get absorbed in the politics and the Twitter?
No, not really, to be honest. I follow a bunch of like think tanks from across the political spectrum. And I'm like a capitalist at heart and love the free market and liberty for all. I find that you are better off following political news as though it is not a horse race. So check in once a week rather than once a day. Because if you check once a day, it just becomes kind of like, useless.
Final one for you. What recent company product strategy have you been most impressed by?
I'll give you 2. I mean, obviously, I think everyone will say Microsoft and OpenAI because that's just like what they have done to search is just straight up admirable. But I'll give you a different one outside software. I think what ExxonMobil has done is just to be admired from the outside. Just an old traditional company. Their business isn't that complicated theoretically. And I think their profits are up about 160%, which is like unheard of in this world, right? Like it's a real thing.
What's the change?
And they've essentially done it by like getting optimizing production. They're getting a lot more out of their assets than people think they would. And they placed themselves in a position to benefit from surge in travel post-COVID. I think everyone kind of underappreciated. Like it's actually real. So if you think about it, the US produced more crude oil in 2023 than it had ever before. These companies have gotten very good optimizing for production in ways that is just like very impressive.
Wow. What's the second?
Second,
The first was Microsoft and OpenAI, and second was ExxonMobil. I think Canvas is incredible.
oh yeah, yes, 100%. I mean, not just Canva for what it's worth. Like the way Canva builds is to be admired. The product is just beautiful. Yeah. But I'll give you a non-Canva one. My third one would be Figma. Not that many companies can survive what happened to Figma, right? Companies that usually mergers that fall apart or acquisitions that fall apart end up in a really bad place because companies just typically have checked out by the time the acquisition happens. Figma is thriving. And I think they're thriving because when the acquisition happened, they decided that they were going to pretend as though it had not happened. They kept the pace of innovation and they kept shipping product, which I think is actually a very risky thing to do as a company because usually the acquisition happens and you have to undo all of it. But it worked out well for them.
Kaz, listen, I so appreciate you putting up with my roaming between conversations on children, product and org design. And so you've been a fantastic guest and thank you so much for doing this, man.
Dude, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.